Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, handsome, how you doing today?
Good, Bruce. This is actually, I realized
Oh,
we talked about the Howie Morenz piece of art that I have,
hmm
and here it is, but people couldn't see it because when they edit it, or when it's edited automatically on
oh,
YouTube, they
right.
just show half. So I just wanted
They
to start
cut,
off
they
with
cut
that. So
us.
there. That's Sid Kelsey, the Edmonton folk artist, and his Howie Morenz. Bruce,
Yeah.
there's lots. Hockey's heating up again. Finally, we got some real games. We got the World Junior Tournament. We got actual Oiler news, speculation about contracts. So today we're going to talk about, quickly, we'll talk about the World Junior Tournament, Oiler prospects therein. We'll talk about the Ethan Bear and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins contract situations. We'll talk about Oscar Klefbom being out for the entire season. And we'll start with just a little bit about the outdoor hockey rink situation, which is blown up in the news big time because of an incident in Calgary. And what are you noticing on the outdoor rinks, Bruce, this year?
Well, I walk by at least one very regularly just down here in my neighborhood in St. Albert, and various other ones at times. And just the quality of the shinny being played is at close to an elite level, at least for shinny. And I mean, just the skating, just the general skill level is just high, high, high. And quickly realizing that this is, elite level or high level minor hockey players that want to get out and skate and play, and they're getting their chance to do so on the outdoor ice a little bit more. So just I can stand there and enjoy watching it for a time as I go by, and sometimes even stop to watch for a bit. And the level of just general skill level is very high for outdoor rinks.
It's interesting. Like these games are going on right now, and if I'm completely honest, I don't know if I understand what the rules are right now in terms of outdoor hockey. I think the latest from Hinshaw, if I'm not mistaken, is that she doesn't want it to happen at all, even outdoors, because,
Hmm.
and I can, you momentarily come close to other people, you're breathing really hard. Maybe there is a theoretical risk. I don't know. The Calgary incident that blew up between the Calgary police and Ocean Weisblatt is his name. He's from a famous hockey family in Calgary.
Hmm.
You haven't seen the video. I
I
have.
haven't.
It was a classic case initially of people being fooled by the video. I think this is really common these days, where you see a short little video
Yeah.
um, snippet of an
Hmm.
incident that's, you see 5% of the interplay between two individuals, and then you judge it on that. And you know, my own take is, I, I think if Ocean Weisblatt, the hockey player, and the police officer could have a do-over, they'd both be wise to take it, because they
Hmm.
both behave badly, in my opinion. I think what we need to get through COVID, Bruce, is some mutual understanding and compassion, and an effort to get along with each
Yeah.
other. And I didn't see that from either the police officer or from the hockey player in this incident. And I feel actually kind of bad for them, because I think they're caught up in something that they're going to suffer from this, both of them, a little bit. The police officer who pulled the taser and threatened the hockey player. I mean, it's an almost comical overreaction to a situation like that. And then wrestling with them, like, if you're worried about the spread of COVID, actually wrestling with someone strikes me as probably the worst thing you could do. So, like, the cure to the problem of people maybe spreading COVID was, you put yourself in a situation where you could easily spread COVID. But all
Yeah.
that aside, again, to get through this, we've got to treat each other with some understanding. And for the understanding for players on these outdoor rinks, if the police like, even if you don't know the rules, or you're fuzzy on the rules and you think it's okay, if the police tell you to do something and they ask you nicely a few times, and that's what the police are saying happened there, that the
Hmm.
bylaw officer, and I think later the police, asked these people to get off. They gave them a warning. If it was me, and someone said, you'll get a ticket, you're doing something that warrants a ticket, but I'm going to give you a warning and you can avoid
Right.
that ticket, I would get off like in a second. Thank you, officer, didn't know, my bad, see you later, won't do that
Hmm.
again. his stance, which was political, we now hear like he's an anti-masker, was to not do that and to put up delaying tactics. Every other player got off that ice, Bruce, except for him. He was also in the wrong. And I'm old enough to be his dad. I have kids that age. I would tell him, like, what were you doing, you lunkhead? Get off the ice. Now go pay your fine and shut up. So anyway, that's my take.
Yeah, the anti-maskers have put a whole new definition on the term "in your face," and sometimes it's not very becoming, to say the least. I saw an incident of a guy in a bookstore.
With your own eyes?
Oh no, just again a long video.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Of a guy being extremely rude to an employee who was doing her job. Anyways, to me, a situation like that, and I certainly did read about it, I just didn't watch the video, is the cops tell the guys, all right, we're going to take a drive around the block and we're going to come back in 15 minutes. The rink better be empty, and solve it that way, as opposed to in your face, as it turned out.
Yeah. So, remember did you ever watch The Wire? There's a great scene in The Wire where they talk about this eloquent solution to a problem of people drinking on the street, because guys in the neighborhood would like to have a beer, like to go in the store, and I can't remember what it was, Miller beer or something like that, and they'd have a drink, and the police would be forced to act because they're drinking openly on the street. And the elegant solution for this was the brown paper bag. You put your beer inside a brown paper bag and you have the beer, and the police, they don't know what it is. Suddenly that could be a pop in there. So It's like, so there are ways to de-escalate, to handle things adroitly, smartly, without threatening and swearing at someone, with a taser. So again, the police officer, and again, I feel bad in the end, mostly. There's no harm out of this. No one's really hurt, but I do feel badly for these two individuals. It's I think a rough lesson for both of them, in terms of, how to behave with a little bit more fellow feeling and compassion in a stressful moment, but needing that kind of composure in that moment, and don't be a jerk. Just don't be a jerk. So, alrighty. Any other thoughts, or want to move on, or? Just
was a lose-lose scenario by everything I read. Yes. And it didn't look good on either side. So.
Yeah, exactly. Alrighty, Bruce, let's first deal with, top of mind for me is Nugent-Hopkins, because I just wrote about it. And I think this is a very, very difficult contract negotiation, depending on the personalities involved. Some players, if you have a hardcore agent and a hardcore player, there's very little chance, I think, that Nugent-Hopkins will sign with the Oilers, unless the Oilers give a contract, which I don't think is in the best interest of the team. I think that this is a classic case of a player who has a chance to enter the free market, and not only get the usual kind of free market bump, but to get kind of an extraordinary one. Because I think there's some team out there, Bruce, that's going to see Ryan Nugent-Hopkins as a player that he isn't. They are going to see him as a first-line center who is capable of helping a winning team as a first-line center, and they're going to be willing to pay him as that. I think that there will be a team out there in that situation who will make that mistake. And I think we've already seen what a team does with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins as their top center. We saw that at Edmonton before McDavid. And it wasn't, Nuge is probably a better player and might be for the life of the contract as a center, but I don't think he's anywhere close, honestly, to being a top line center on a really good team, the first line center. And if he's signed and paid as that, and I think there's a distinct possibility will be that, I think that will be a mistake for the team signing him, obviously, and maybe for him, because he's going to be in a situation like Kyle Turris or Matt Duchene, or one of these players who have signed these huge contracts where they can't be that player that's expecting to happen. So my take on him is that he is a first-line winger. He's a first-line winger in the NHL and should be paid like that. And we've seen some examples, both before COVID and after COVID, In Europe they call it the Corona, which I think is a much more elegant phrase for it. So before and after the Corona, Chris Kreider signed a 7-year deal for $6.5 million,
Mm-hmm.
28 years old. After the Corona, Brendan Gallagher signed in Montreal a 6-year deal at $6.5 million. So there's $6.5 million is a pretty sticky number, if you ask me. I think Montreal probably overpaid on Gallagher. I think that the contracts are going to go down, generally speaking. But $6.5 million per year for Nugent-Hopkins on a 5 or 6-year deal,
Mm-hmm.
I think would be the sweet spot for the player and the team. But I do honestly think if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins wants to get more than that, he can get that on the open market, because there will be a team that will pay him between $7 and $8 million a year on the open market, I suspect. What's your take?
My take is I don't get the sense that he's a mercenary that's all about the money. I don't see him as a big ego kind of guy. I think he likes a situation where he's an important part of the team, but part of the team, and he's now that he's made the move to the wing and had success there, and he has two brilliant superstar world class centers that he could play with either or and excel in either situation. Like, he's in a pretty good spot here, and I
It couldn't be
I think he
better,
likes
Bruce.
it here.
Yeah, couldn't
I
be
think he
better. Like hockey wise,
right.
maybe.
I think he likes it here. I think he's waited long time for the team to turn it around, and if, as I suspect, the team has a strong year this year, he's going to be reluctant to go to some team that sees him as being their first line center. I mean, he was the Oilers' first line center for a big chunk of his early career,
5
and
years.
he had scoring wingers, and he was pretty good in as a complementary player, and he's very good as a complementary player today. Um, but as a guy that you build your first line around, I'm not sure that. I mean, he's very good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't see that as a path for some team to soar to the top. Whereas where he is now, and I think it was a bit of a revelation on the wing that we found that his strengths as a defensive player shine through more as a winger than as a center, where a lot of the duty is a down low grinding, shoulder to shoulder from, in the triangle from the, the hash marks to the boards and end boards. And whereas, it's some of his skills, overtaking guys, lifting their sticks, stealing the puck, coming out of nowhere to intercept passes, and the wing is, and this surprises me, frankly. I always saw him as a sort of a prototypical center with the play going through his stick a lot. But he's very adaptable, and that's a big part of his value to the Oilers. He could fill in for them as a center. He's great on the power play. He's very good on the penalty kill. And he's got they can use the guy in all situations, right? Goalie out for the Oilers, goalie out for the other team. He's one of those guys you're going to find on the ice. And I'll make the comparison again. The guy whose career I find parallels his pretty fairly is Patrick Marleau. Quite a number of years earlier, obviously, but Marleau signed a number of contracts in San Jose for over 12 years that were all in the $6 million range. And I could see Nuge, if they can find something in that sweet spot between $6 and $7 million, I think that's fair value for him. And whether they make it for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, I mean, that's a matter of negotiation. But it wouldn't be in the team's worst interest to give him, say, a 3-year extension. And but again, that anything over in my valuation, anything over 7 million, you're starting to get to the point where your overall value is you're losing your advantage. If you
Especially with the these contracts, like a player like Rasmus Andersson, who's a comparable to Ethan Bear, right? We'll get into this a little bit more detail with Bear, but Rasmus Andersson, pre-Corona, in January 8th, he signed a 6-year deal for $4.5 million. Now that's we
That's a
see
Clef Bomb deal, eh?
a lot of contracts just before COVID hit.
Mhm.
Jake Muzzin 4 years, Jean Gabriel Pajot 6 years, Chris Kreider 7 years,
Zach
Zach
Cassian,
Cassian 4 years,
or
Marcus Peterson 5 years. 5 years, he's another defenseman in that category. 5 years at 4 million. More recently, we've seen two pretty good comparables: Philip Myers and
Eric
who's the other?
Chernak.
Eric Chernak signed for 3 years, 2.5 million for Myers, 2.95 million for Chernak. So the point there is the prices are going down. The interesting thing with Nuge though is I think his price can. There's a countervailing force in that playing with McDavid and Draisaitl, especially Draisaitl all year, could really drive up his points per game and his perceived value
Right.
by other teams because people get paid for points in the NHL.
They
The
do.
interesting thing, Bruce, is for years on this podcast, you and I think, said the same thing. Don't trade Nuge before you try him on the wing. There was always talk about trading him, and we were just, you and I know speaking for myself, desperate. I was desperate because I never liked him as a center, if I'm completely honest, Bruce. I didn't think in the end, for whatever reason, he just didn't get the job done defensively. He had kind of a reputation as a two-way player, but I never really saw it at center because he would lose too many puck battles around the net for grade A scoring chances. And even in the corners, like he was there, but he wasn't on the guy. He was by the guy, but he was never on him. He wasn't Pavel Datsyuk. He never developed into that kind of defensive player as a center. And I'd seen him long enough at center to think maybe it's never going to happen. And I don't know why that's the case, but I mean, there's lots of big men down there battling around the net, and maybe he's just better suited to be on the wing as a defensive player because he's no questions at all about him as a defensive winger. He's exceptional. He's a strong penalty killer as well. So we have seen him now on the wing. He's a fantastic top line winger, two-way player who can play the power play, penalty kill, and but so he should be paid like a winger like that. Who's not at the very elite of attacking wingers. He's not David Pastrnak or what's the guy in St. Louis, Tarasenko.
Yeah.
But he's a pretty good attacking winger, and you'll be hard pressed to replace him. That said, Bruce, the Oilers signed 3 wingers this year: Dominic Cahoon, Tyler Ennis, and Jesse Puljujärvi, all for contracts. What was Cahoon? 2? Was he?
925 for Cahoon.
Oh, geez,
1 million for Ennis, 1.175 for Puljujärvi. So the 3 of them combined are going to pull in 3.1 million this year. So for
there's
3 players.
So it's risky to go that route. Nonetheless, if Nugent-Hopkins contract demands were out of line, Holland's fallback position as well. Dominic Cahoon actually had more points per 60 at even strength in the last 2 years than Ryan Nugent-Hopkins did. Maybe we'll try that and see how it works. And if that, if Cahoon wants too much money, we'll get another player because they've got a lot of players to sign in coming years. Like they're going to have to sign a power play quarterback. It's going to be Bouchard or Barry, I think. And that player is going to be expensive. And a couple of those players, let's say they keep 2 of those 3 players, both of those players are going to be expensive. Yamamoto is going to be expensive. Darnell Nurse is going to probably be very expensive if they keep Darnell Nurse. So they have to be very careful throwing around, even a extra million for a player with this cap situation. And Bruce, I just think as the fiscal reality of the NHL sinks in, I just think all these contracts are going to be going down, and so you shouldn't probably rush, I don't think, into signing players because everyone's kind of got to adjust to the new economic reality, and as that sinks in, people's expectations will change and get lower, but it might take some time. So you don't want to rush. Even now, I think like Montreal with all these big contracts that they signed with Gallagher and Toffoli and Jeff Petrie, I think they overpaid on all of those deals, and it will be like I think they were paying old money in the new money situation.
They had
And you don't
cap
want to do that.
space, and they used it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, today we saw Eric Hola signed for 1.75 million.
There you
Michael
go.
Granlund got pretty good money at 3.75, but I think he took a bit of a haircut. And I think haircuts are going to be the nature of the beast as we go forward. And uh, uh, just because of the somewhat shaky economic footing, not just of the NHL but of the entire economy. So the whole thing is to me a little bit on shaky ground right now. But uh, I think obviously the objective for the player doesn't change whether he has a contract or not. He wants to play the best that he possibly can and raise his value to the highest possible level, whether he's trying to grab the attention of one general manager or 31 or 32, I guess. Uh, it's just a matter of I guess they put it on the back burner for now. They'll talk at some future point. I mean, as a fan of the player, I dearly hope that they can work something out. I'm still waiting for that Edmonton Oilers who starts, finishes, and plays all of his career in between in Edmonton. And I have higher hopes for Nuge than I've had for any player in quite some time to be that guy.
Have we ever had that guy? Even
Uh,
even for a marginal player?
well, I mean, you have guys that have short careers that
But
only
no, let's
played
say a
here.
guy who's played 10 years in the NHL.
Well, Randy Gregg came really close.
Oh,
And
but he
then at
played in
the end, he
Vancouver.
went to Vancouver. I think they got him in the equalization draft at that time. The Oilers didn't protect him despite his 5 Stanley Cup pedigree. And he wound up playing. He got hurt this one year in Vancouver. Didn't play a lot of games there, but he did not finish his career in Edmonton. And in fact, he did not finish his career in particularly good terms with Edmonton because of that. What happened there, as I understand it. So
Yeah, I don't think he.
that was real close. But other guys, nope. They've constantly moved on from guys usually in their mid to late 20s. The odd guy made it to 30. Not very many guys have made it much further than 30 as career life for Oilers.
Bruce, just reading a little bit in NHL news. Apparently, if the junior hockey leagues don't go ahead, they can place players in the AHL this year. I'm just reading right now. That's interesting.
That makes sense.
So we have Dylan Holloway. He's going to be playing
Mhm.
for Team Canada tonight
Yeah,
against, who are they playing? Russia in an exhibition
playing
game?
Russia tonight. Depending on when
And
you're
then,
watching this podcast, it might be last night, but yeah,
yeah,
coming right
or
up.
last week, depending on how
World
we
Juniors.
probably won't do another podcast till next week at some point.
Mhm.
Who knows? And we have Philip Broberg, who's the captain of Team Sweden. I
Nice.
heard Mark Spector and Bob Stauffer speculating that if Broberg kills it, crushes it in the tournament, he could still make the Oilers. From what I've seen, Bruce, he really, anything's possible, and you never know. But I think that would be a mistake. From what I've seen of Broberg's game, he should be in Sweden the rest of the year. He's in
Mhm.
a very good position there. His game's trending up slowly. He's got ups and downs, mistakes. He's not an NHL player in my view right now. He's got a chance next year to make the Oilers, I'd say. A better chance though of playing in the AHL for a year and or half a year at least and
Mhm.
developing there. Just get used to the North American game on the smaller ice and see how that goes before he's an NHL player. I think that's how they should view him as a player who will play in the AHL at least half the year next year, and they'll make a decision in January on what to do with them. That should be, in my mind, the mindset with Broberg heading in. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't disagree. He's on the Clef Bomb curve, of development. Clefbom stayed 2 years in Sweden. As coincidence had it, he came over to Edmonton, to Alberta to play in the World Junior in uh, uh, the 2012 World Junior. He just played one exhibition game here in Edmonton against Team Canada, just like Sweden was supposed to play Canada this time around before they repaired to the other group. Of course, this time both groups are in Edmonton, so he'll be playing here. Uh, Broberry will be, and uh, in Clefbom's case, he spent most of his 20-year-old season playing in the AHL. He got called up, I think, at the trade deadline, played something like 17 games at the end of that season. And then the next year, he started the year down in the AHL, and he came up maybe November, and he wound up playing 60 games. And only then was he a full-time NHLer. And he hasn't seen the AHL since, of course. And I mean, that's as it should be. That's the kind of development curve that's very possible for Broberry. Maybe he'll be a little bit quicker because Klefbom lost basically an entire season in Sweden to injury, which has, of course, been a bugaboo of his entire career. And so it maybe took him a little longer to adapt over here because he lost some ground there. But to assume that Broberry is going to come over and just get airlifted straight into the NHL and be a positive force, that's a stretch in my view. He's got, to me, consistency is something that he needs to work hard on. Even if he comes over and kills it in the World Junior, well, great, but that's 2 weeks. I'd like to see him play at the top of his game for a couple months somewhere and prove that he's ready to handle that aspect of it and bring close to his best game on a nightly basis.
I'll be surprised if he doesn't have some really spectacular moments in the World Junior Championship.
Me too.
Like, he is that player. Like, I think he's got better tools than Clefbom. He's a better skater. He's at least as big, if not bigger, and he's a better skater. I think a significantly better skater, because there's just few people that skate as well as Philip Broberry. He's just this amazingly smooth, fast skater. It's not quite the lightning bolt of McDavid, but it's close. It's close. It's this different thing. It's very, I don't want to say, I'll say it. It's very Paul Coffey-esque, his skating. He doesn't have Coffey's shot and passing and offensive reading of the game, but the skating is it's reminiscent of Coffey, or as I've said before, Serge Savard also comes to mind. That kind of incredible big man, graceful skating stride. So yeah, and Holloway, Bruce, is this will be his second year in college, and I suspect I would be surprised if it's not his last year as a college hockey player.
Very possible.
We'll see how he does. He's more of an unknown to me in this tournament, how he's going to do. Again, just a really big and super fast and very aggressive hockey player with some skill. And I don't know, maybe he wants to spend a lot of time in university, but I think that he's going to show that through this year, he got off to a great start to the year. If he continues that trend, continues to play like he did in the first couple of games, he'll be in the AHL next year as well, if not the Oilers. As a young forward, you can stick him on the third line, let's say, or the fourth line even. As a winger, I don't. It's okay to play in the AHL, but I don't think it's as necessary as for a center and a defenseman, because the defensive reads are so much more difficult for centers and defensemen. I just think they need that AHL time. But if he's going to be a winger, he could be making the Oilers, certainly challenging for a job on the Oilers at a next training camp. But we'll know a lot more about that after this tournament. We'll see how far along that he is.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to watching him play, and in a different role for Canada as a winger, given a shutdown responsibility from the sounds of things, a high-profile line, but kind of the second line that'll go up against the Tufts is the theory, as I understand it. Of course, a tournament like this can be very fluid, but in university, he's been playing center, looking good at that position, and the fact that he can play either at this young age is a very encouraging sign. Because of his age, he only would have had 1 year of junior remaining had he come up through the junior ranks, meaning that next fall he would be in position to turn pro. So if he decides to leave university after his sophomore year, he'll go straight into the pro ranks. There won't be any of this, what they did with Tyler Pitlick, which was take him out of university and then put him into junior hockey. There's no need for that. He can. So he's eligible to turn pro as early as fall 2021. Whether he stays one more year, I mean, in some ways the advantages to the Oilers that when they sign him, they're going to have potentially a 3-year value contract, entry-level contract. So the more mature and ready he is when that contract kicks in, the more value that they can potentially get out of it. So that's the flip side. But it wouldn't surprise me to see him turn pro. I do think he'll need AHL time, but maybe not a huge amount of it. And as as you say, with the capacity to play wing, you can get a start in the NHL. I mean, I remember when the Oilers called up Sean Horkoff, and as it happened, I went to his first NHL game, and he was playing left wing on the fourth line. Well, eventually he moved to center on the fourth line. Then he worked his way up the depth chart, and eventually was center of the first line. But he started as a winger with a little fewer defensive responsibilities and a little more offensive bent to the position, and it served him well.
Bruce, Ethan Bear.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Nugent-Hopkins, so he's not signed right now. He's apparently practicing Kelowna with other players. I think the Oilers are better served on a 1-year deal with Ethan Bear, and I think that for a few reasons.
Okay.
The Oilers are auditioning for a new power play quarterback. He's in the running with, I think, Tyson Barrie and Evan Bouchard. Mm-hmm. So we don't know who's going to win that job, and whoever wins that job is going to get paid.
Yep.
So there's that, and you wouldn't want to pay Bear as if he was going to win that job now, or with that in mind. Now you could pay him now, and he might win that job, and you might get him. Let's say you sign him to a 3-year deal, and he wins that job, then you might get him on value. But I really do think there's going to be a deflationary trend in the NHL. That in the short term, as the financial calamity of North America hits home, and especially in terms of, there's obviously not going to be many, if any, fans in the arenas this year. Maybe next year maybe it'll be back to normal next year, but will the economy be back to normal? And that's a big question. That's a huge unknown. So I just think if you wait till next summer, you'll have more information on Ethan Bear. There's some players who do take a step back in their second year. I don't expect that to happen, but you never know. And you also do have these 2 new competitors for the same job, essentially. Right. You probably want two out of the 3 of them, but Tyson Barrie and Evan Bouchard. And Evan Bouchard is Tyson Barrie's already been a phenomenal power player and offensive player at the NHL level. Evan Bouchard's trending in that direction. I mean, you pointed me to that hockey numbers analyst. He apparently works with some NHL teams on the draft. And this fellow out of Calgary estimated that I think Bouchard had like an 89% chance of being an NHL star. I like that. I like that kind of not putting a number on something which doesn't really warrant a number. I think it's kind of funny to do that. But his numbers, Bruce, based on Evan Bouchard's point scoring all the way along, like he really is trending to be a top producing, point producing NHL defenseman. And just watching, he certainly passes the eye test. I mean, he just passes the hell out of the puck, and his shot is phenomenal. So Ethan Bear is competing with Evan Bouchard and Tyson Barrie. One of those guys won't be here next year, Bruce, is what I would say. So for that reason, just find out where Bear, sign him to the 1-year deal is what I would hopefully like to see. And
cheap, you mean? Just sort of press the advantage that he doesn't have arb rights and say, you're Kevin LeBanc, take it or leave it. We're going to give you $1 million and we'll look after you next year.
Well, you don't even have to be a jerk about it in a way,
no.
Because I'm not saying that's what you're suggesting, but because there's Clefbombs out there is a little bit. You don't want to use all your cap space, but you could, instead of giving him 900,000, you could give him $1.1 million. You could give him a little bit more this year because he is a top 4 defenseman. he was last year. He was actually in the top pair. He and Nurse played the toughest competition that the Oilers faced.
Yep.
So maybe there's a bit of room to be a bit more lenient, and you don't have to worry about, just the 15% automatic raise that he'll get next year on that deal, because you just know he's going to get paid more anyway because he is a top 4D man. I don't know. Maybe you got to grind as hard as you can, but I'm not sure that's essential here, because he did really play well last year, and maybe you could recognize that in some way with his pay. But I would hold off on the longer term deal. What about you?
Yeah, it's a conundrum for sure. And these days, I mean, there used to be the bridge deals tended to be 2 years, and they would expire with the guy 2 years before unrestricted free agency. But in recent times, we've seen more and more of these 3-year bridges, and we just seen them with Myers and Chernak that we talked about earlier, who are pretty reasonable comparables to Bear, and they're not identical players by any means, but they're all young right shot defensemen who have made significant progress over the time of their entry level deal. Signed a 3-year bridge where it'll come due, with a year to free agency. The player potentially could force the issue then by going to arbitration for 1 year and becoming a free agent. I'm thinking that's less of a concern than I used to, in terms of, I think paying the guy market value is not the worst idea, or paying him fair value. I don't actually mind if there's a way to make it work, of going the 3-year route, and somewhere in that range that those two Myers or Chernak contracts were, something under $3 million. If you can get Bear at that price and get him for 3 years, you got a good defenseman and potentially at a bargain for his term of his bridge deal. I know Hart Levine of Puckpedia. He's a very, very smart guy about all this salary cap issues, and he suggests a route that the Oilers can actually afford to do that despite their current up against the cap status. That with Clefbomb now definitively going on long-term injured reserve for the season, that what the Oilers have to do to have the most flexibility during the year is find a way to get Clefbomb on the active roster, or the paid roster for day one of the season, then put him on LTIR the very next day, and leave him there for the year, and then they have maximum flexibility for the year. And Hart's idea was they could basically go with a 20-man active roster to start the season. They could send out 3 guys that would ultimately be on the 23-man roster, but they don't need them for game 1 of the season, and create some sort of artificial cap space that way to get Clefbomb in there. Then on day 2, Clefbomb goes out. These 3 guys all come back, and they're all in the $1 million range, because you can only bury $1.075 million at most for a player. So say the Oilers, Kari Yamamoto is one guy that they can send down. They don't have to waive him or anything because he's still on an entry-level contract. But they could actually waive a couple of guys that they don't think anybody will claim on waivers. Who would claim James Neal and his contract on waivers? So they could do a paper transaction where they waive him to the taxi squad for 1 day, bring him back the next day, and in the meantime, that's created enough cap space. And what Hart said was to maximize the cap space from that move. You actually want to pay the player you're signing something close to that available space to make the most of it. So they can, if they can find a sweet spot that's a figure that both the player and the team is comfortable with, that they can afford to make that move, then that's not a bad price point. And in conversation with him, he seemed to think 2.x million was very doable. And it's the other good thing. The thing about opening day rosters is if you get injuries in the preseason, that can really wreak havoc on you, because all of a sudden you can't keep a 20-man roster if you got 2 guys hurt that are on the payroll. But they don't play any exhibition games, so hopefully they can come out of the preseason with an intact roster and don't have to, put salary on injured reserve, and they can temporarily do that thing where they slice it right down to 20 and restock the roster the very next day. So that's um, it's a complicated thing, long-term injured reserve. But if you have put a
Yeah.
player on LTIR before the season starts, you have way less flexibility during the season than you would if you were able to keep him on that roster for one day.
I could see Bear wanting to do that,
Hmm?
partly because he gets long-term security, right? Like he gets X
Yeah.
million. No, he hasn't made his millions yet, right? So
Hmm.
he will make millions if he
Hmm.
signs it. So he
Absolutely.
gets that security. Plus, as I mentioned, he's in this competition with Bouchard and Barry. If he signs the contract, well, that gives him a leg up in terms of uh, being in a position to beat out one of those two other guys for a spot, because I don't think they'll have all three. Uh, they'll probably go with one, slightly less paid than
Hmm.
one of those three guys. I mean, I'd love to have all three of those guys for the next probably 5 years as your right shot demon on the Oilers. I don't see that happening. So, but you know, you made a persuasive argument there, Bruce, I think, for that scenario. So I could see either scenario actually. So
Yeah, me too.
the Oilers are kind of in a win-win right now because this Clefbomb situation. They lose because they've lost Clefbomb, obviously, but
Right.
it does give them the cap flexibility now to work out something different with Ethan Bear, and they might be wise to do that. So maybe that's what's going to
They
happen.
just have to get to day two. I mean, and to me, I mean, Evan Bouchard, no, he's on a potentially value contract for 3 years because his contract slid last year.
Yeah,
So, he's on ELC
that's right. He does
for
have a
for
three-year
three
deal,
years. So there's no reason to get rid of him. I think there's every possibility that Tyson Barrie is a 1-year rental.
one and
And
done.
if Bouchard progresses the way that many think that he will and should, that he's the guy that will fill that position long term of running the power play and being the ace number one defenseman. And he won't cost he'll cost a fraction of the 3.75 that Barry's making this year, let alone the 5 or 6 or 7 million he might be looking for if he has a big year in Edmonton. So I think there's every chance the team could get a good year out of Barry, but then move on from him because I think they have an in-house replacement.
Bruce, Oscar Klefbom is out for the year. His
Mhm.
futures as an NHLer, I think, is at this point in doubt. It's safe to say there are examples of players missing full years at his age and then coming back and being strong NHLers. But those examples are rare. Much more common is a player who gets a major injury and it's just never the same and doesn't doesn't come back. So we're hoping, of course, that Oscar Klefbom does come back. When he was healthy in 2017, he was
Mhm.
trending to be a very strong, a useful top pairing defenseman in the
Mhm.
NHL. Since
Yep.
then, I don't think he has consistently been that player. He's been inconsistent, and it's probably been related to his health as much as anything. Because again, we saw a strong run of play in 2016-17 where he was really good for a long time. So he's out, and my argument is this isn't the disaster it could be because of the Oilers' depth. It's obviously not good for Oscar Klefbom personally, but for the organization, they finally have some defensive depth. And in Darnell Nurse, Bruce, they have a player who actually was, I think, de facto number one D man on the left side last year in terms of even strength play, not on the power play and maybe not on the PK. I think he and Clefbom were pretty close in sharing time on the PK.
Yeah.
I think Clefbom was the better PK player. I think Oscar really got it down last year and was exceptionally good on the penalty kill. At even strength, though, I thought Nurse was a better player than
Mhm.
Clefbom last year. Aside from the playoffs when they both were really bad.
Yeah.
But so here's my 5 reasons why Darnell Nurse is ready to step up and will fill those skates and I think really come into his own this year as a top pairing defenseman, not a number one defenseman, but as a top pairing defenseman. So he's as ready as he'll ever be. He's 26 in February. He's played 350 NHL games. he's right in that sweet spot for a defenseman where he should be playing his best hockey that he'll ever play in the NHL. He's got something to prove. After last year's playoffs, he just was very weak defensively in the playoffs. He didn't look like he was anywhere close to his A game, and it looked like mentally he was just trying to do too much. Maybe he's constantly out of position in the defensive zone. So he's got a lot to prove right now. And to the extent where after the season, Bruce, people were talking about maybe trading him. I mean, Brian, his name came up in credible discussions on Oilers Now, for instance, Brian Burke, Brian Lawton mentioning they're going to trade a top 4 D-man. And Nurse was certainly in that category of players who could have been moved. He's competing for a massive new contract. After this season, he can sign again with the Oilers. And this is his big chance this year, next year, to make that mark where he gets that huge contract. He's got the numbers. If you look at his usage, including his time on ice shorthanded, time on ice overtime, which I think is a great, if you want a stat about how much a coach trusts a hockey player and really values him, who does he play in overtime when the game's on the line? Like, that's when you're going to see who are your really great two-way performers that the coach really trusts. And Nurse got a lot of time in overtime. He puts up points at even strength, and he has for a couple of years now. Gets a lot of shots on net at even strength. When you look at his numbers, he is a top pairing defenseman. When you look at all those numbers, he's a top pairing defenseman in the NHL right now. And he's already faced tough competition. He and Ethan Bear, according to Puck IQ, the site run by Darcy McLeod, and what's the other fellow's name?
G Money.
G Money.
Oilers Nerd Alert.
Oilers Nerd Alert. According to their site, which is, I think it's a strong site in terms of rating the competition that players face. Darnell Nurse and Ethan Bear face the toughest competition. So it's not like a situation where we've seen in the past where players have been thrust into roles they're not ready for because they've never played them before. He is ready. He's played this role. He's just got to play it better. And I think he's going to. I think the playoffs, I'm going to say, represented a huge wake-up call for Darnell Nurse. And I think he's going to step up and be that player that we think he can be. Because I know, Bruce, for the first time in the playoffs, I was seeing the player that his critics always saw. That player who's prone to mental errors and mistakes and is not going to get it done. I saw that, and it was kind of shocking. But for me, I'm just going to write that off as an aberration and go with his body of work through his career and say he's going to take the next incremental step that he's been taking them all along. He's going to take one more.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he's growing. He's ready. Let's put it that way. And after 5 years into his career, where he did sign one of those 2-year bridges after his entry-level contract, and he definitely outperformed that bridge contract. I think by any sort of rational measurement, he outperformed the bridge contract. Argument could be made he's the number 1 defenseman on the team, or certainly number 2. By ice time, by even strength ice time, number 1, and he has, he's been a horse on even strength for some years now. By goal share, he's had better results than the Clefbom Larson pairing has over recent years. He brings, there's elements to his game that he brings that other players on the team don't have. Like, he's a part-time enforcer back there on the back end. That has value, whether you like it or not. It's part of the makeup of a team that you better have a few guys out there that are ready to back up their teammates, and he's one of those guys.
Huge value. Value.
Yeah, I value it. I've been watching hockey for going on 60 years, David, and it's always been part of the game. The ratio of how much of it is has changed, but it's never going to go away, I don't think. And it's that has value. So, trading him would have just created, a hole that would, a multi-dimensional hole that would have been tough to fill. And they have. Now, finally, he's getting paid like the number 1 defenseman on the team. He's number 1 on the payroll, so you can make that case. But up until now, he's, to me, delivered value. Uh, he's got questions to answer. He's far from a perfect player. He does make mistakes. He's a high event player, and the question is, do the good events outweigh the bad events? And I would argue on balance, yes, they do. But I do hope and expect he's going to make another step. And with Clefbom out of the picture, the team is going to rely on him more heavily than ever this year. And I guess the next question is, can he handle an additional 2, 3, 4 minutes a night of ice time, or will they have to fill those minutes in another way?
Well, but will he even get more ice time, Bruce? Because really the difference between Clefbomb's ice time and his ice time was power play time.
Right.
And I don't see Nurse actually filling that role. Like he might play
Right.
somewhat more even strength, but I think actually Caleb Jones is ready to step up and play significant amount of time at even strength. So Nurse's ice time might not actually change that much because it could be Barry or Bear who will be taking that power play time from Clefbom. Right. So it's actually Benning played 14 minutes a game, I think. So actually the extra 3 or 4 minutes might go to the third pairing defenseman who's suddenly playing 18 minutes a game, 3 or 4 of them on the power play, and that could be Barry. Some people think that we're going to see Barry and Nurse play together, which would be really interesting as well. And we'd see, I think, Bear and Jones would be the second pairing, which would be interesting. I guess that would leave. The problem is that leaves Russell and Larson as the third pairing, and who moves the puck there. That's not going to work out unless, of course, my favorite Theodore Lundstrom steps in and plays with Larson. Bruce, I've got another appointment here, so we're going to have to, unfortunately, let you have one final point if it's a short one.
Well, just on Nurse, when Clefbom got hurt 2 years ago, and all of a sudden Darnell was playing 27, 28 minutes a night, and he didn't cope that well with it at that time. Now he's an older, more mature player now, and to play those kind of minutes, you have to be able to conserve your energy a little bit, and that comes with wisdom and smarts and experience. So he may be better served to do that, but I would like to see him keep him below, say 25 minutes at the top end. But he's going to be an important player for the Oilers this year, and he's got a lot of game, David. He was in last full season, 2018-19. He was the first Oiler since Steve Smith in 1990-91 to score 30 even strength points from the back end.
Nurse was.
Yeah, first guy in 28 years to score 30 even strength points.
He's a very underrated attacker, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people that don't like his game underestimate how much he contributes offensively because he's not a traditional puck mover, and they underestimate toughness, frankly. So that's typically what I see. I think some people have blind spots for various areas of hockey, and that's what I see of Nurse's biggest critics. I do think, though, that they have a point when they focus in on his defensive inconsistency and maybe some inconsistency overall. That's the main criticism I would have of Nurse, and that's what he's got to address, just figuring that out. Game in, game out, shift in, shift out, making the easy play maybe instead of trying for something a bit more spectacular. And that might be the wise choice. So, Bruce, I will let you go. This is our final podcast before Christmas. So I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. And I want to wish everyone who watches this podcast and watches this on YouTube. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We have the wisest, smartest hockey fans in the world listening to this podcast. If you're listening now, you are one of them, and we appreciate you, and we appreciate your input. We talk to a lot of you on Twitter. So Merry Christmas to all of you as well.
Yeah, top of the season to you, David, and to all of our watchers and listeners. I better explain to the listeners that you were holding Howie Morenz up in front of your face when I called you handsome at the beginning of the podcast here. I was thinking later, wait a minute, somebody on SoundCloud might take that the wrong way. But yeah, anyways, I do want to wish the best to everyone and to say thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.